I think that we, the U.S. government, under the president, it's all hands on deck. This is about saving Americans. This is about protecting our national security.
At sunrise in the Eastern Pacific, the United States Coast Guard carried out one of the largest drug seizures in its operational history. During a high-speed pursuit of a suspicious vessel, patrol teams uncovered and confiscated more than 24.5 tons of cocaine, an amount federal authorities estimate at over $362 million in street value. According to operational data released under Pacific Viper, this is the largest volume of narcotics ever taken off the ocean by a single U.S. patrol cutter during one deployment. The scale of the shipment underscores the seriousness of the threat. Had these drugs reached U.S. shores, they could have supplied numerous trafficking networks, fueled higher levels of violence, and contributed to a surge in overdose cases across multiple states. Analysts note that the financial gain alone would have strengthened several transnational criminal groups active in Colombia and Ecuador, allowing them to expand their reach and reinforce their operations. Stopping this shipment at sea is viewed as a crucial step in disrupting the supply chain before it has any impact on American communities. Stay with Military Power for a full breakdown of how this massive shipment was stopped at sea. At the center of this operation, everything began with a single contact on the edge of a trafficking corridor that the Coast Guard has monitored for years. Early in the morning, just after the initial seizure that stunned federal analysts, surveillance crews detected a high-speed vessel moving in a pattern consistent with long-range smuggling operations. The boat was traveling without an identification signal, a clear violation of maritime rules, and its course aligned almost perfectly with routes historically used by criminal groups in Colombia and Ecuador. For Coast Guard watchstanders, these indicators were more than enough to trigger a closer look. Using intelligence collected over previous weeks, analysts matched the vessel's speed and direction with several earlier sightings that had been flagged as potential smuggling attempts. This correlation, combined with the unusual absence of transponder data, led authorities to classify the vessel as a high-risk target. Within minutes, an MH-65 Dolphin helicopter lifted from the deck of a nearby cutter, heading straight for the suspect boat. At the same time, fast response cutters moved into position to block possible escape routes. Every movement followed established procedures designed to intercept traffickers before they could transfer their cargo or disappear into international waters. As the helicopter approached, crews confirmed visual contact. The vessel displayed signs commonly associated with narcotics transport: reinforced compartments, irregular weight distribution, and evasive maneuvers. Once it became clear it was being followed, the Coast Guard issued warnings and ordered the vessel to stop, but the operators continued at full speed, a behavior that further reinforced the assessment that illegal cargo was on board. After several attempts to flee, the vessel was forced to slow down when a cutter successfully moved into its path. Once boarding teams stepped onto the deck, the evidence appeared quickly. Officers opened the first concealed compartment and immediately identified tightly wrapped bricks coated in protective layers, typical of cocaine shipments moved through the Eastern Pacific. Further inspection uncovered additional stacks stored throughout the hull. Field testing confirmed the substance was high-purity cocaine. While the quantity on this first vessel was significant, what mattered more to investigators was what the shipment represented: the start of a coordinated push toward the United States by several transnational criminal enterprises. The discovery aligned with the Coast Guard's earlier intelligence assessments that large organizations had been preparing for a major movement of narcotics. Analysts reviewing satellite tracks, communication data, and suspicious vessel movements saw a pattern forming long before the interception took place. The Eastern Pacific had become a preferred transit zone for criminal networks because of its vast distance and limited maritime traffic in certain areas. This allowed smugglers to move large quantities with reduced risk, relying on speed and concealment instead of complex logistical chains. The significance of the first interception grew rapidly As additional data arrived, authorities found markings on the packaging consistent with groups operating out of both Colombia's Pacific coast and Ecuador's northern corridors. These identifiers are often used internally by cartels to track product ownership, purity level, and distribution rights. For investigators, this was a critical clue. It meant the vessel was not an isolated attempt, but part of a structured system designed to move large loads efficiently. In fact, several of the symbols matched intelligence gathered from seizures in previous years, suggesting that long-standing networks were becoming more aggressive. What emerged from this single stop was a clearer picture of how traffickers were trying to adapt. Instead of sending small, frequent shipments, criminal groups were shifting toward fewer but larger operations, hoping that a single successful delivery could replenish months of revenue. This made each vessel more dangerous and more consequential, both financially and operationally. The risk to the cartels was higher, but so were the potential gains. Federal authorities recognized that if this wave was allowed to continue unchecked, several tons of cocaine could reach the United States within a short period.
We warned them, stop sending poison to our country.
The first interception therefore served as a turning point. It validated the need for a broader, more aggressive maritime campaign. It demonstrated that intelligence collected across multiple agencies was converging on the same conclusion. An extensive operation was underway, and traffickers were preparing for a major push. With that confirmation, federal leadership authorized an expanded response, transforming a single interdiction into what would become Operation Pacific Viper, a coordinated effort involving cutters, aircraft, analysts, and international partners. What began as a routine observation evolved into the foundation for one of the largest counter-narcotics campaigns the United States had conducted in years. And from that moment forward, the mission shifted from identifying threats to dismantling an entire supply chain. The first seizure did more than confirm the presence of cocaine on a single vessel. When analysts began reviewing the markings found on the packages and cross-checking them with previous interdictions, a pattern emerged that pointed directly to two major production zones, the Pacific coastline of Colombia and the northern corridors of Ecuador. These two regions have long been identified as primary sources of high-purity cocaine. But what stood out in this case was the consistency of the labeling and the scale suggested by the packaging method. The evidence indicated the product came from well-established facilities, operated by groups with the capacity to move large quantities across international waters. As investigators continued to examine the data, they found that the shipping method was far from simple. The route uncovered was not a single, linear path, but a multi-layered system designed to minimize detection at every stage. Intelligence assessments noted that traffickers used a combination of high-speed boats, low-profile vessels built to skim just above the waterline, and relay points positioned far offshore. These vessels were engineered for stealth, speed, and long-range endurance, allowing them to move through vast, lightly monitored areas of the Eastern Pacific without drawing attention. Further analysis revealed that the groups behind these shipments operated more like international corporations than small criminal outfits. They maintained logistical divisions responsible for production, transport coordinators who managed the flow of shipments, and enforcement units tasked with protecting routes. Financial records collected from earlier cases suggested that these organizations reinvested revenue into upgraded equipment, new vessel designs, and encrypted communication systems. The level of organization was more than tactical. It was strategic, demonstrating long-term planning and the ability to shift resources rapidly when necessary. The United States had observed similar patterns in previous years, but the intelligence gathered after the first interdiction provided a clearer picture of how advanced these networks had become. Communication data indicated that some groups monitored weather systems, Coast Guard patrol schedules, and gaps in aerial surveillance to identify ideal windows for movement. In certain cases, they deployed decoy vessels to divert attention from the primary load-bearing boats. These tactics reflected an understanding of U.S. maritime operations, and they underscored the need for a broader response. Pacific Viper initially began as a monitoring effort aimed at identifying trends and assessing the scale of activity. However, once analysts saw the consistency of the markings and the structure of the routes, the mission expanded. What had started as routine observation shifted into active disruption. Federal authorities concluded that the networks were preparing for a surge, an attempt to move significantly larger amounts of cocaine within a short period. The depth of the supply chain meant that a single interception would not be enough. Multiple coordinated interdictions would be necessary to collapse the entire pipeline. As agencies shared intelligence, a clearer operational picture formed. Satellite imagery highlighted clusters of suspicious vessels departing from similar points along the Colombian and Ecuadorian coasts. Communication intercepts suggested that several criminal organizations were cooperating, pooling resources to increase efficiency and reduce risk. This collaboration was notable because cartel groups typically operate independently or in direct competition. Joint operations indicated an attempt to scale production and distribution beyond their usual reach. The structure of the network also explained why the first interdiction had occurred when it did. U.S. analysts realized that the traffickers were timing shipments to coincide with periods of high maritime traffic, using commercial shipping lanes as partial cover. In other instances, they exploited remote zones where patrol frequency was lower, relying on speed and unpredictability to pass through. These methods were consistent with high-level smuggling operations that rely on sophisticated logistical planning. The mounting evidence left little doubt. The United States was facing a coordinated maritime effort unlike anything seen in recent years. The criminal organizations involved had developed a system that could deliver massive quantities of narcotics if left unchecked. This realization prompted federal authorities to shift from intelligence gathering to active interdiction. Instead of waiting for individual boats to appear, the mission now aimed to intercept them systematically. From that point, Operation Pacific Viper was no longer a passive surveillance effort. It became a targeted campaign designed to strike at multiple points along the network. Analysts predicted that if the United States could disrupt enough of the planned shipments, the financial impact would destabilize the supply chain and halt further movement. With that objective established, the Coast Guard and its partners moved toward executing a series of interdictions that would ultimately total 15, each one hitting a different node of the trafficking structure. The discovery made in the first interdiction had revealed a network far larger and more organized than initially believed. Now, with confirmation in hand, the United States prepared to escalate. The next phase would be decisive, and the results would reshape the trajectory of the entire operation. For 6 full weeks, the Eastern Pacific became the hunting ground of the United States Coast Guard. After the very first smuggling boat was stopped in the middle of the ocean, Operation Pacific Viper started and never slowed down. American ships, helicopters, and planes worked together day and night, and in the end, 15 different smuggling boats were caught. Every single one of them was carrying cocaine from South America toward the United States. Every single one of them failed. The big cutters, more than 120 meters long, carried the names James, Monroe, Bertholf, Stratton, Mohawk, and others. They sailed for weeks without going back to any port. On their decks, helicopters took off and landed all the time. Smaller cutters that can go faster than 70 kilometers per hour ran on the sides and in front. Above everything, large Navy P-8 planes and Coast Guard C-130 planes flew long patrols and watched the sea with special cameras that can see in the dark and through clouds. All the pictures and information went immediately to a center in Florida, and from there, straight to every American ship that was hunting. When a boat looked strange or moved in the wrong place, the nearest cutter received the exact position and started moving at full speed. The smugglers tried every plan they had, but nothing was good enough against the American teams. Far out at sea, almost 2,500 kilometers from land, one fast boat with 3 big engines ran without any lights. It was going more than 75 kilometers per hour and believed the night would protect it. A helicopter from the cutter Stratton found it easily. The shooter inside the helicopter fired only 3 times. Each bullet hit one of the engines. In seconds, the boat stopped moving. The 4 men on board put their hands up at once. The Coast Guard team found almost 2 tons of cocaine packed in plastic and brought everything back to the big cutter. A few nights later, the cutter Mohawk was sailing in complete darkness when its cameras saw something very strange. A long, low shape, almost under the water. It was one of the famous narco semi-submersibles that cartels build in the jungle. These boats are very difficult to see because they stay so low. 2 small, fast boats left the cutter immediately and reached the smuggler boat in minutes. The men on the smuggler boat tried to open holes so their boat would sink quickly with all the drugs. The American boarding team worked faster. They opened the secret doors, pulled out more than 4 tons of cocaine, and carried the packages to their own boats before the narco submarine disappeared under the waves forever. On the 11th interception, the cartels tried to be clever. They sent 3 fast boats that looked exactly the same. 2 boats had no drugs and ran very fast in different directions. The 3rd boat in the middle carried more than 3 tons and tried to escape quietly, while the Americans were busy with the empty boats. The plan looked good on paper, but it failed completely. American commanders saw everything from the planes above. They sent helicopters after the 2 empty boats and fast cutters after the real one. In less than 30 minutes, all 3 boats were stopped. The men on board were arrested, and all the cocaine was taken. Many times, when the smugglers understood they could not escape, they tried to destroy the drugs. They threw hundreds of packages into the sea, but Coast Guard's small boats followed with strong lights and collected almost everything that was floating. Some crews poured gasoline on the cocaine and tried to burn it. American firefighters from the big cutters arrived quickly and stopped the fire before too much was lost. In one case, they saved more than 900 kilos that were already burning. Other captains opened big holes in their own boats to sink them fast and hide the secret rooms. Even then, the American teams stayed on the sinking boats, opened the hidden places, and carried the drugs to safety before the boats went down. Some nights, the ocean was rough and the wind was strong, but the American helicopters and ships kept working. The crews on the cutters slept only a few hours and then returned to their positions. Everyone knew that every boat they stopped meant less poison on American streets. After 6 weeks, the operation finished. All the cutters returned to Port Everglades in Florida. The final numbers were bigger than anyone expected. 24.5 tons of pure cocaine taken from the water, more than $360 million that the cartels would never see. 58 drug traffickers arrested and awaiting trial, and 15 ships confiscated or sunk at sea. This was not just good luck. It happened because the United States has strong ships that can stay at sea for 2 months, helicopters that can stop a fast boat in seconds, planes that can see everything day and night, and friends in many countries who shared information immediately. The cartels spent millions of dollars on new boats, special paint to hide them, and secret radios, but in the end, it did not matter. From the moment a smuggler boat left the coast of Colombia or Ecuador and turned north, the ocean was no longer theirs. Operation Pacific Viper did not only take drugs away from the cartels, it broke their money chain. Without that money, they cannot buy new boats, pay their workers, or plan the next trip. 15 interdictions in 6 weeks showed the world something very clear. The United States Coast Guard can find you anywhere on the ocean, stop you any time of day or night, and take everything you have. The United States is out here. We see everything, and we will take it all. After the interdictions ended, all seized cocaine was transported to Port Everglades, the federal center where maritime evidence is processed under strict chain of custody rules. The mission shifted from open ocean operations to a controlled investigative phase, where each bail was documented, coded, and prepared for prosecution and intelligence review. Teams from the DEA, CBP, and Homeland Security investigations worked jointly to analyze the shipment. Their job involved far more than weighing narcotics. Every package carried markings, letters, numbers, symbols, or color codes that linked it to a specific cartel faction. By comparing these identifiers with existing databases, investigators could determine who produced the cocaine, who controlled the shipment, and how it moved through the logistics chain. Electronic devices recovered from the vessels provided equally critical intelligence. Mobile phones, satellite radios, GPS units, and handwritten logs were examined by digital forensics teams. From these devices, investigators extracted location histories, routing data, and communication fragments that helped reconstruct the full journey from Colombia and Ecuador to the interception point. This timeline revealed staging areas, rendezvous coordinates, and evidence of support vessels. A key discovery emerged from GPS patterns. Several boats had departed South America at nearly the same time, indicating a coordinated attempt to push multiple shipments north. This strategy would have overwhelmed limited patrols, but Pacific Viper's expanded surveillance allowed the United States to intercept every vessel involved. Laboratory testing of the cocaine confirmed consistent purity levels tied to major cartel production sites. This proved the 24.5-ton load was not the work of a single group, but a multi-organization effort designed to saturate the U.S. market ahead of a seasonal demand spike. Cutting off the shipment prevented hundreds of millions in cartel revenue that would have funded weapons, recruitment, and territorial expansion. What emerged at Port Everglades was not just seized contraband. It was a complete intelligence picture of a coordinated trafficking network. Investigators could now map the system, identify its vulnerabilities, and anticipate future routes. Evidence showing the logistics chain had collapsed long before reaching American soil. Operation Pacific Viper delivered a blow that went far beyond the drugs taken off the water. When investigators confirmed the shipment's value as more than $360 million, it became clear the operation had cut off a major revenue stream that several cartel factions relied on to maintain operations, settle territorial disputes, and finance expansion. The impact was immediate. Intelligence partners in Colombia and Ecuador reported unusual activity inside cartel leadership circles. Payments stopped, weapons purchases were delayed, and recruitment slowed as budgets collapsed. U.S. analysts noted that cartels function like multinational corporations, dependent on steady income to pay subcontractors, maintain infrastructure, and bribe officials. Losing 24.5 tons of product caused these financial structures to break down overnight, creating tension among factions that had previously cooperated. What had been a stable logistics chain quickly fractured under internal pressure. A second consequence emerged through regional intelligence reports. Internal purges. Cartel leaders questioned how American forces intercepted a shipment of this scale and suspected information leaks. This triggered reprisals, leadership changes, and operational disruptions, further weakening the organizations already hit financially. U.S. officials emphasized that the mission did more than stop one shipment. It undermined the economic base that cartels depend on to build new maritime routes, fund low-profile vessels, and maintain bribery networks. Without strong financing, their capability to sustain long-distance trafficking weakened significantly. Intelligence collected during the operation revealed not only the route used, but also plans to expand into new transit zones. With this information now in U.S. hands, federal agencies gained valuable insight into future cartel strategies, enabling more targeted maritime enforcement. The operation also shifted the regional security environment. Partner nations saw that large, coordinated shipments could be intercepted offshore, strengthening Washington's position that early interdiction is essential for national security. Several governments increased patrols and intelligence sharing as a direct result. Above all, Pacific Viper sent a message. Cartels can no longer assume their maritime networks are untouchable. The United States demonstrated that intelligence integration and maritime strength can dismantle even sophisticated trafficking systems. A major supply chain collapsed before reaching American waters, reshaping the threat landscape across the region. Operation Pacific Viper ends with a question that reaches far beyond the coastline. How should America defend itself against threats that form thousands of miles away? The seizure of 24.5 tons of cocaine makes one fact unmistakable. If this shipment had reached the United States, it would have fueled violence, addiction, and criminal expansion across multiple cities. Blocking it at sea did more than disrupt a drug route. It prevented real harm that would have unfolded deep inside the country. The operation also redefines the role of the U.S. Coast Guard. What happened in the Eastern Pacific shows that America's first line of defense is not at its borders, but far offshore, where criminal networks attempt to move their product long before it reaches U.S. soil. The ability to intercept, coordinate across agencies, and work closely with regional partners demonstrates a level of capability that adversaries underestimated. Pacific Viper is a reminder that national security begins long before danger reaches American communities. It also raises a broader responsibility, sustaining the partnerships, intelligence, and maritime presence needed to prevent the next attempt. If you believe protecting America starts long before these drugs reach our cities, share your thoughts and subscribe to Military Power for more truth the mainstream often overlooks.